Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Before I start my talk on marching towards OHS Free Clinic, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Rajneesh, Dr. Amit Borse, Amardeep Rana, and Ramesh from MQR Pharma. And of course, special thanks to Dr. Nandita Parshetkar and Dr. Sunita Tandurkar for giving me this opportunity to talk on such a interesting and important topic, which is very important for all of us in our day-to-day practice. So, if you just look at the changing trends as far as the OHSS is concerned, initially we used to talk about the etiology and management of OHSS and how the just OHSS is an enigmatic disorder. Then we started thinking about the OHSS free clinic, and now we discuss about the OHSS free clinic. And I am very sure that soon OHSS will be the thing of the past, and you will find chapters in the history of IVF regarding OHSS, and we all are waiting for this day to come. Now, OHSS is actually a gravest complication of IVF, and it is the situation where control over an hyperstimulation gets uncontrolled. And this is something which was unheard of unless we started doing IVF and IUI. And with this, we are now getting more and more cases of OHSS. Now, what happens in OHSS? Actually, the ovaries, they enlarge in size, and these ovaries, they produce ovarian hormones and vasoactive substances. This leads to a hyperpermeable state, and there is a global increase in the vascular permeability and decrease in the choroidal osmotic pressure, which is ultimately responsible for the OHSS. So actually, the fluid shifts to the extravascular, that is third space, and there is a depletion of the intravascular volume, which leads to hypotension. So this is very classical feature of third spacing. You get ascites, you get effusion, you get edema. The cardiac preload decreases, cardiac output reduces. There is an arterial or visceral addition, and renal perfusion falls down. There is also a hemoconcentration, and changes take place in the liver perfusion. And a situation where there is too much of fluid outside and too little fluid inside is what you get in OHSS. Now, if you just look at the incidence of OHSS, mild OHSS is very common. In fact, it is seen in almost 33% of cases. And if you go to the first classification, which was given by Raibo et al. In 1967, they actually did not include grade 1 and grade 2, that is mild grade OHSS as OHSS. They were considered as byproduct of ovulation stimulation or ovulation induction. It is very common. It is seen in almost 1/3 of the patients. And it is the acknowledgement that controlled ovarian stimulation has achieved. But what is the concern for all of us is the moderate to severe OHSS, which is seen in 3 to 8% of cases. Now, what is the etiopathogenesis of OHSS? The exact etiology of OHSS is not clearly understood. Pathogenesis is enigmatic, but one thing is clear, that this syndrome is HCG dependent, and it is HCG which is the kingpin in OHSS. So you all know that when we start stimulation in IVF cycle, or for that matter IUI cycle, we start with gonadotropins. And FSH, once you start FSH, they start recruiting follicles, and multiple follicles are formed. Each follicle secretes estrogen, and there is a rise in the estrogen levels. And these E2 levels, they are actually not responsible for vasoactivity. Remember, friends. So what happens that once the follicles are formed, we give HCG for trigger of ovulation. And if you don't give HCG, or if you withhold HCG, the OHSS will not take place. That means HCG is the trigger factor, and high 2 is if E2 levels are very high, then it is a predictive factor of OHSS, but OHSS will not occur unless and until HCG is given. So that is how HCG is a kingpin. Any IVF cycle has got two components. One is the gonadotropins, that is stimulation, which takes place by either HMG or FSH. And then we give something for prevention of premature LH surge. It is either in the form of agonist protocol, which is long down regulation, or antagonist protocol. And then we give HCG for LH surge, and we do ovum pickup. Now it would be interesting to find out what are the various cycles which we undergo in our day-to-day practice, and how it has got a relation with the OHSS. The first is something which is age-old and which has been tried since last so many years, is agonist protocol or a long protocol. And this long protocol is something which is not good for OHSS, friends. Then there is antagonist protocol, where we start directly antagonist from day 6 of stimulation, And this is nowadays becoming a popular protocol, and this is actually responsible for less incidence of OHSS, and OHSS is not seen so commonly with antagonist as compared to agonist protocol. Then we have donor cycles where there is no need to transfer. So donors are only stimulated. We are not transferring the embryos, and therefore the risk of OHSS is still there, but it is less as compared to the other cycles or stimulated cycles. Recipients are classical patients where stimulation is not taking place, therefore there is no risk of OHSS. And freeze-all policy is something which is now we are going to extensively discuss about this. This is something which is not associated with OHSS at all. And before freeze-all policy, we used to do cycle cancellation. That means if there is a chance that OHSS might take place, HCG trigger was not given, and this is something which is not done nowadays, and it is not required. I'll tell you why. So our problem is greed. Everybody wants more eggs, and that is the problem with the IVF consultants. So because of this, you need to have some harsh measures like demonetization or lockdown is something which is nowadays a harsh measure which is required. Similarly, you need something like something to control the OHSS, and that is the thing which we are discussing today. If you just look at the cause of OHSS, you will find that vasoactive substances are responsible for OHSS, and VEGF is something which is the major cause of OHSS. Along with VEGF, cytokines, interleukins, and prerenin and renin, angiotensin 2, TNF alpha are all responsible for OHSS. What happens is they cause neovascularization during follicle formation. There is increased vascular permeability, and this leads to OHSS. If you do a serum and follicular VEGF levels on the day of pickup, you'll find that there is a very high level of OHSS, which is actually predicting the possibility of OHSS. So ultimately now the research is zooming down or zeroing down to the anti-angiogenic strategies, the strategy which can be helpful in the prevention as well as treatment of OHSS. So one thing is clear, that every follicle which is formed or which is stimulated is secreting VEGF, and this VEGF is ultimately responsible for increasing the vascular permeability and which is responsible for the OHSS. So VEGF is basically the cause of OHSS. Now, if you just look at the risk factors for OHSS, you'll find that classical lean and thin PCO patients, young patients, lean and thin, with AMH more than very high AMH, say more than 10, they are classical patients who are very high risk of OHSS. On the other hand, the patients whose age is more than 35 years, who are having diminished ovarian reserve, or they are obese, where AMH levels are low, the chances of OHSS are less. Similarly, you give agonist protocol, the chances are very high. Antagonist protocol, the chances are comparatively less. On the day of HCG, if the follicles are more than 20, or if the E2 levels are more than 3000 in IVF or more than 1700 in IUI, then the chances are again high. And if you give HCG trigger, the chances are very high. So these are the patients who are actually high risk for OHSS. Now, before we think of this OHSS, we all know that stimulation along with HCG is something which is going to be responsible for OHSS. But one question which comes to our mind is, can OHSS occur without stimulation, or can it occur spontaneously? And the answer is yes. Rarely OHSS can occur without stimulation also, and this can be because of the familial mutations in FSH receptors, increasing the sensitivity to trophoblastic HCG, which is seen in spontaneous conception. Only one case has been reported so far with this familial mutation, so it's a very rare situation or phenomena. There is some situation like severe primary hypothyroidism, where very high levels of TSH are known to be responsible for OHSS. So these are the situations where even without stimulation, you can get OHSS. Now, a very important question is, can you get OHSS even in mild stimulation protocol? And yes, the clomiphene citrate, or even for that matter letrozole, can also lead to OHSS. So you have to be careful. In fact, IUI and time intercourse is something which we all are doing in our day-to-day practice, and it is done by almost all the gynecologists, and this is a very common procedure. And even this IUI or time intercourse can also lead to OHSS. So you have to be careful. This is the point which is to be noted. How do you classify OHSS? grossly, OHS is classified as mild, moderate, severe, and critical varieties. And in this, various parameters include sonography or ultrasound, then clinical features, and of course, lab findings. And with the evolution of the classification, people started adding few points in the classification to make it more as per the times. So initially, ultrasound was not included in the classification. Later on, they added ultrasound as a feature of OHSS. Is something which was added as a part of OHSS, and slowly laboratory findings were given importance because lab findings are extremely important as far as classification is concerned. So you can see that there is a spectrum of disorder. It starts from mild enlargement of the ovaries, where the ovaries are less than 5 centimeter, then they become 5 to 12 centimeter, more than 12 centimeter, and then there is a tense ascites. Initially, the patient has got abdominal discomfort, which ultimately leads to pain, and this pain can be so severe that patient is restless, and ultimately he becomes orthopneic. Nausea is followed by vomiting, and then the patient has dyspnea and oliguria. The bloating sensation leads to ascites, and this ascites becomes a tense ascites. And if you go to the lab findings, you'll find that PCV or the hematocrit, which is initially around 35, goes to more than 40 in moderate classification. In severe, it becomes more than 45, and in critical situation, the hematocrit is more than 55%. So this is how the spectrum is seen as far as OHS is concerned. Another very interesting classification is early and late onset OHSs. Early onset OHSs is something which is seen because of the HCG which we are giving for trigger. This is seen in 3 to 7 days after HCG, and it is because of the exogenous HCG. Late onset OHSs is something which is seen after 10 days of HCG, and this is the feature of early pregnancy. Actually, if you get OHSs in the say 10 days after trigger, then you are happy that probably the patient has conceived. But then this is not so, because this is the late onset OHSs is something which is more severe, and it is responsible for almost 70% of severe OHSs, and it is also more commonly seen in multiple pregnancies. So it's a alarm for all of us that if the patient develops OHSs in the later half of the transfer, so there is a possibility that this patient might develop a severe OHSs, and you have to be more careful. Now, there are various preventive strategies which you can actually do as far as prevention of OHS is concerned. And this starts from the planning stage itself. Like suppose the patient comes to you and the patient is a known case of PCO, and you know that she is a probable candidate for OHSs, then you have to identify the risk. You can start metformin in such patient and plan the stimulation protocol accordingly. Like you can start with mild stimulation protocols. Then during the cycle, you can give antagonist, and you can think of something different from HCG as a trigger, like GnRH agonist trigger. Then you can think of posting and freeze-all policy and in vitro maturation. So I will just one by one discuss all the strategies which are extremely important as far as prevention of OHSs is concerned. The first thing is the drug and the method of giving the drug. It is said that gonadotropins are gonadotropins are gonadotropins. That means there is no relation between the type of gonadotropin and the OHSs. If you give HMG, or if you give recombinant FSH, or you give HP or highly purified FSH, in that situation, the chances of OHSs are almost same. So what is important is the method of stimulation, how you stimulate the patient. Suppose, for example, the patient comes to you with PCO and you are planning time intercourse. In that situation, chronic low dose protocol is something which is going to give you the best results. You need patience, but then you get good results, and the chances of OHSs are almost nil with chronic low dose stimulation protocol. Similarly, Gardner has said that if you go for a step down protocol, it will allow more follicles to undergo atresia, and therefore the overall follicle which are induced or the chances of OHSs are also reduced. So that is how you can plan your stimulation in such a way that the chance of OHSs is less. Then what you give for prevention of premature LH surge. Either you choose between the agonist or the antagonist protocol, And in that case, it has been proved beyond doubt that antagonist is better than agonist protocol as far as OHS is concerned. Can we go for a coasting or controlled drift? Controlled drift is something where you can actually withhold gonadotropins for last 2 to 3 days of your stimulation cycle. And then you can wait till the E2 levels fall below 3000 and then you can actually go for the HCG trigger. Now it has been found that if you give coasting for more than 3 days, then it will not work. So at the most 3 days or 2 to 3 days is the optimum period for coasting where you may get good results. Otherwise, beyond 3 days, the coasting does not help. The most important of all this is the trigger. And probably with more and more research on this aspect and its relation with OHSS, it is now said that in OHSS, HCG trigger is probably a history. Why so? Because if you give HCG, initially we used to give HCG and that was 10,000 HCG, or then came the recombinant HCG that is 250 IU. The half-life of this product or drug is almost 6 to 9 days. It takes 6 to 9 days for this HCG to clear from circulation. So people say that you can give HCG in a lower dose, that is around 5000 units of HCG. This may work. Some people they tried to replace HCG with LH, and recombinant LH can actually be a substitute for HCG, but it is not cost effective. It is very costly drug. So the best drug which is available as a replacement for HCG to prevent OHSS is GnRH agonist. And this is something which is giving consistent results. So we give either triptoril 0.2 ml or leupride 1 milligram subcutaneously as a trigger for HCG. And this is something which is definitely going to help us to prevent OHSS. But there is a problem with this drug. The problem is with the luteal phase, because with this drug, the luteal phase becomes deficient. And so you cannot transfer. So it is best in freeze-all patients where you are not transferring, or it is really good for donors where there is no question of embryo transfer. But you must remember a few points whenever you are using GnRH agonist as a trigger. One thing is you cannot use it in agonist protocol. You need to have an antagonist protocol to give agonist trigger. Second thing is you cannot transfer because the endometrium is deficient. And third point, which is the best part of the story, is that there is no effect as far as oocyte quality is concerned. So you get good quality oocytes, that's not a problem, but the problem is with the endometrium. So even if you are not getting good endometrium, still you feel like transferring the embryos or still you wish to transfer. What you can do is you can give adjuvant low dose HCGs. Humaydan et al. Has said that 1500 IU of HCG on the day of pickup or a dual trigger of HCG with low dose of HCG and GnRH together can help in giving a good endometrium. Along with this, you need to give intensive luteal support in the form of injection progesterone till 12 weeks of pregnancy. But that is too much. Giving injections for 12 weeks of pregnancy is really difficult for the patient. And in spite of doing all these things, the potential risk of OHSS is always there. So you are not OHSS free when you give a small dose of adjuvant HCG as a trigger along with GnRH agonist. Now, once you give the trigger, you have again some time when you are doing ovum pickup. You can reassess the patient, and if you get say more than around 20 eggs or more than 20 eggs, then you can think of freeze-all as an option. Embryologists are playing great role as far as prevention of OHSS is concerned, and they have changed the concept of IVF OHSS. Freeze-all policy is something which is extremely important. It is working as a safety net for all of us. And this is the policy which has actually virtually helped us to get OHSS free clinics. Another thing which we can do is we can go for blastocyst and do single embryo transfer. And this single embryo transfer is going to have a double benefit. It is like ek tir do nishan. Why? Because not only you reduce the chance of OHSS, but also you reduce the chances of multiple pregnancies. In vitro maturation is something which is promising, but we will discuss how IVM is becoming less and less popular day by day. So the best policy as far as prevention of voices is concerned is to avoid embryo transfer. So say no to embryo transfer, and that is the right choice if you really wish to avoid OHSS. But if at all you want to go for embryo transfer, then as we have already discussed, you have choice, like you can go for dual trigger with, as Umaden has stated, and along with that you can give intense support and do single embryo transfer with blastocyst. But friends, embryo transfer is a risky affair, and it is always better to avoid this. And with the improvement in the freezing techniques, we are getting such a good results with frozen embryo cycles that it is always better to avoid embryo transfer to completely avoid the chance of OHSS. Now, for prevention of OHSS, you can use colloids, and these colloids are available in the form of albumin and hydroxyethyl starch. The role of colloids is questionable, but albumin is definitely has got a role to play for prevention of OHSS. It is said that if you give albumin to 18 high-risk patients, then you can prevent one OHSS. But the problem with albumin is that it inherits the risk of allergic reactions, and transmission of virus is always a possibility. And this is the possibility which you have to keep in mind. But these are the drugs which you can try for prevention of OHSS. Then there are some miscellaneous techniques to prevent OHSS. These include aspiration of the ovary to prevent OHSS in non-IVF cycles, which is not a practical solution. Laparoscopic ovarian drilling or diathermy is something which we all have been doing, though these days it is becoming controversial. But definitely laparoscopic ovarian drilling is something which can be done to prevent OHSS. Metformin is a drug which is really doing wonders as far as PCO is concerned, and addition of metformin reduces the risk of OHSS. Steroids along with aspirin is something which is going to help us. IV calcium gluconate infusion is a very good option which can inhibit cyclic AMP dependent adenosine secretin, and therefore you can reduce the chance of VEGF synthesis, and therefore the chance of OHSS is reduced. Aromatase inhibitors can also be tried. Dopamine agonist is becoming more and more popular these days, and it is very popular for prevention of phosphorylation of VEGF receptors, and therefore it helps in the prevention of OHSS. Another option is to continue GnRH agonist or antagonist for 1 week in, say, donors or freeze or patients where you don't have to transfer the embryos. So ultimately, all these strategies which are responsible for prevention of OHSS, they are actually going for the VEGF antagonism, and therefore VEGF antagonism is something which is definitely helping in the prevention of OHSS. So we will discuss all these strategies one by one. Dopamine agonist or cabergoline is the drug of choice, and it is becoming more and more popular nowadays because it is the drug which prevents OHSS and also treats OHSS. There are many RCTs which has come which shows that it prevents phosphorylation of VEGF receptors. It has been found that it is really good for moderate OHSS and also to some extent in severe OHSS. How do we give cabergoline or dopamine agonist? We start this drug few hours before giving HCG trigger or say Dupre trigger, and the dose is 0.5 milligram per day for prevention of OHSS for 8 days. The maximum dose is 4 milligram, but you can increase the dose up to 7 milligram in 1 week. That means 1 milligram per day can be the maximum dose, and this is the dose which is used for the treatment of severe OHSS. Apart from this, you can continue giving agonist or antagonist. Suppose you are on antagonist cycle, you can continue giving antagonist for 1 week, and this is definitely going to prevent OHSS, and it helps in the treatment of OHSS as well. As far as in vitro maturation is concerned, I think we have to analyze the situation, and we should answer this question that where are we as far as IVM is concerned. This is the 2013 Fertility and Sterility Guidelines, and a committee opinion says that IVM is not a very good treatment of choice for prevention of OHSS. Why? Because one thing is that the results are lower than expected. It depends on the competence of the embryologist. Then implantation and pregnancy rates of IVM are less, and information on the safety of IVM, that is in vitro maturation, is not yet available, and therefore it is not very popular as far as prevention of OHSS is concerned. And this is the latest study or paper which has appeared in Human Reproduction 2016, which says that the this treatment has got emerging role in fertility preservation and cancer patients, but routine use is not getting popularity. So in vitro maturation cannot be used routinely for prevention of OHSS, but it is good for urgent cancer prevention treatment. The new kid on the block is kisspeptin, and this kisspeptin is a novel trigger for oocyte maturation. Uh, Hypothalamic peptide coded by KISSI gene, that is KISS1 gene, potent stimulator of HPA axis, is responsible for this treatment, and it actually came from the place called as Hershey Kiss, which is famous for the chocolate delight Hershey Kiss, and therefore the name of this drug is kisspeptin. The studies on kisspeptins, they say that kisspeptin 54 is found to be effective and safe trigger with very high yield, high implantation rate, and no HSS at all. So kisspeptin is definitely going to help us. So this is a study by Humaydan et al. In 2015, where they have tried kisspeptin 54 as a trigger for ovulation, and this is the latest study of 2018, where they have tried kisspeptin in two groups of the patients. One group where the single dose of kisspeptin was given, and another group where two doses of kisspeptin at 10 hours interval were given, and they found that kisspeptin is going to help us in the prevention of OHSS because it is a wonder drug, and you get good oocyte qualities, you get good number of oocytes, and the chances of OHSS are also low. So we all are looking forward for this drug as a replacement for HCG as far as trigger is concerned. Now I would like to tell you one important point, that sometimes what happens that you don't anticipate OHSS at all and you are caught unaware. We all know that there are Poseidon criteria for poor responders, where group 1 belongs to the group of patients where the patient is young patient with good AMH, but still they do not respond to the stimulation. Similar situation you may get in OHSS. The patients with advanced maternal age, say more than 35 years, and low AMH may also come with surprise hyper response. And the only thing you have to do is you have to be vigilant. And the best strategy is during stimulation, ovum pickup, embryo transfer, and even after embryo transfer, you have to be vigilant because exception proves the rule, and therefore you should have a high index of suspicion as far as OHS is concerned. And even the patients with low MH or normal MH may also go into ovarian hyperstimulation. Now this is a very important slide where there is a summary of what we have discussed till now. How do you go ahead with prevention of OHSS? Before actual procedure, during the procedure of IVF, and after the procedure of IVF. Before procedure, the first thing is you must identify the patient at risk. You should have proper stimulation protocols. You should monitor the cycles properly, use GnRH antagonist, and may go for posting if required. During the procedure, you have to use GnRH agonist as a trigger. You can go for in vitro maturation. You can use albumin for prevention as a prophylaxis. You can transfer single embryo, or you may go for freeze-all policy. After the procedure, cryopreservation of embryos is the best modality of prevention. You can give dopamine agonist to the patient, and you can continue agonist or antagonist so that the patient does not get OHSS. Now, comes to the next part, and that is diagnosis and treatment of OHSS. This diagnosis of OHSS is based on the three pillars of OHSS, that is clinical, ultrasonography findings, and lab investigations. These are the three pillars of the diagnosis and management of OHSS. So initially the patient comes with pain and discomfort, then she gets nausea, then there is a weight gain, distension, dyspnea, ultimately leading to orthopnea, tachypnea, hypotension, and oliguria. On ultrasound, the ovaries are enlarged, then there is ascites, and ultimately patient gets hydrothorax. On lab findings, the CBC is you get a raised hematocrit and raised hemoglobin levels, and hematocrit may go to dangerously high levels of more than 55 also. So what is important is you must have a high index of suspicion. And actually in this COVID and in fact post-COVID era, we all are discussing about telemedicine and video conferencing and video calls. All these things can be utilized very intelligently as far as OHS is concerned. In fact, you can actually call patients and ask them if they have any problem like pain, breathlessness, discomfort, nausea, vomiting, or bloating after you do embryo transfer. And if they have any of such symptoms, you can just call them, do the ultrasonography, and do lab investigations and start the treatment. So this is something which is very important. You have to catch them in the early stages of OHSS so that they don't turn up into a full-blown OHSS. And you can definitely take the use of this WhatsApp and video calls and telemedicine for prevention of OHSS and the treatment of the initial treatment of the OHSS. Now, there are some tricky situations which might happen with OHSS if the patient gets pregnant. And a very typical situation is ectopic pregnancy with OHSS, or you may get heterotopic pregnancy with OHSS. There are many papers or the case reports which are available uh, where they have found the patients with heterotopic pregnancy and OHSS or a bilateral ectopic pregnancy with OHSS. Now in this situation, the patients are already having enlarged ovaries, there is ascites, and in that situation, if the patient is having tubal pregnancy, there is a very high chance that you may miss this ectopic pregnancy. And in IVF, anything is possible. IVF है तो मुमकिन है, कुछ भी हो सकता है. So you have to be very careful for these tricky situations. So the treatment of OHSS depends on the approach towards OHSS patient, the pathogenesis oriented treatment, and the empiric treatment. And in pathogenesis oriented treatment, all the drugs which are available, they are actually treating the VEGF and VHF and VEGF. So the drugs are cabergoline, which is the drug of choice, not only for the prevention, but also for the treatment of OHSS. A very high dose of cabergoline of 1 milligram per day for 7 to 8 days can help in the treatment of severe OHSS as well. Then other drugs are indomethacin, AC inhibitors, pentoxifylline, VEGF antagonist, and cytokine inhibitors. All these drugs, they are actually targeting the VEGF, but they are empirical in nature. Now, the problem with OHSS is that the mild patients may suddenly turn up into severe cases. एक बार बंदूक से गोली छूटी तो हम कुछ भी नहीं कर सकते. You cannot control this OHSS, and that is the problem with OHSS, and that is the reason why we are so much afraid of OHSS. If the patient comes to you with mild symptoms, the only thing you have to do is give reassurance to the patient. In cases of mild OHSS, if there is no pregnancy, the symptoms will subside in 2 weeks time. So you are happy that the patient is not pregnant. In pregnancy, the mild symptoms may progress, but rarely they progress to the severe symptoms. But as I have already told you, once the mild OHSS sets in, at any moment it can turn up into the severe OHSS, and that's the problem with OHSS. So you have to be vigilant. You should give high protein diet to the patients, give adequate fluids, and ask the patient to take adequate rest. Here comes the importance of eggs. And you should remember that Sunday ho ya Monday, rose khao ande. Something which you must tell to all your patients that eat as many eggs as possible, because, and this is a chart which you all should have in your clinic, and you should try to convince the patients that this is the cheapest option which is available with us, because with 8 egg whites you get 28 grams of protein, or with 4 whole eggs you get 28 grams of proteins, and this much protein is available at such a meager cost. So that is the cheapest option which is available, and we must take full utilization of this, and we must ask our patients to have maximum eggs in their diet so that they get high protein diet. These mild OHSS may turn up into the moderate OHSS, and if the patient gets moderate OHSS, then the best clinical method of detecting the moderate OHSS is inability to speak full sentence and vomiting with poor urine output. So this is the situation where you are actually thinking of possibility of moderate OHSS, and you must hospitalize such patients. Here, the hematocrit goes to more than 45%. You need not start IV fluids, but you must ask the patient to take plenty of fluids with high protein diet. Take electrolytes, and oral electrolyte solutions like sports drink, like Red Bull, can be advised to such patients so that they get adequate electrolytes. You should be taking blood pressure, abdominal girth, and intake output record of this patient daily, and see to it that she does not go into severe form of OHSS. And before discussing the treatment of severe OHSS, we all should keep this point in mind, that if you have HDU facility at your center, then it is really going to help you, because HDU, at least HDU level treatment should be available in your center so that you are able to manage these patients very nicely, because this is a patient who requires not only a critical care but obstetrician care as well, especially when they go into the secondary OHSS with pregnancy, early pregnancy. So it's better to have a HDU facility at your center. Severe OHSS is something where there are dramatic deteriorations, and this type of OHSS is usually seen in the secondary OHSS 8 to 9 days after giving trigger, and it is because of the endogenous HCG. In this severe OHSS, the hematocrit has got a very great importance. It is said that with slightest rise in the hematocrit, that is say from 42% to 44%, 2% rise in hematocrit, there is an 8% drop in the plasma volume. That means even slightest rise in hematocrit should be taken with extreme caution, and it has to be given a great importance. Similarly, when the hematocrit falls down, even 1% fall is going to give you big relief. So this hematocrit is a very sensitive indicator, and you must keep watch on the hematocrit if you are managing the patient of severe OHSS. The next parameter is the leukocytosis, and if the count is more than 25,000, it's a really a bad prognosis, and we must keep watch on this. You have to give fluids to these patients, because if you don't give fluids, then you may reduce the ascites, but friends, ascites is better than renal shutdown. So you have to give good perfusion to the patient, and she must receive adequate fluids. And adequate fluids means normal saline 1.5 to 3 liters per day, but these crystalloids are not sufficient, because they will only provide fluids, but they will not take care of the OHSS part of where there is a uh, too much of fluid outside and too little fluid inside. So this hyperpermeability is taken care of by albumin and starch. And these are the plasma expanders which must be given when crystalloids don't work. The drug of choice is of course albumin. It is given as 50 to 100 grams at 25% concentration every 2 to 12 hourly till hematocrit level falls to below 45% and urine output start increasing. But this albumin is known to have allergic reactions, and the spread of infection is the drawback of this albumin. But then in ICU setup, you have no choice but to give albumin to the patient. In severe OHSS with oliguria, you can go for albumin furosemide chest protocol, which gives best results. Where 2 units of albumin is followed by furosemide, it will result in diuresis. And this is how you have to go on adding albumin and then furosemide. This is called as chest protocol. But then there is a possibility of hypotension and hemoconcentration which should be avoided, and you may require dopamine drip in such situations. Paracentesis or tapping is something which is actually the last option, but it is very important for treatment of orthopnea, where there is a life-threatening OHSS with patient who is not able to lie down. In this situation, with tense ascites, the patient is so uncomfortable that you have no choice but to tap. And here, this reduction in the pressure can actually help in the treatment of OHSS. Now, there are some paradoxical situations which may occur whenever you are treating the OHSS patients. In some situations, what happens that the patient is improving, you find that the urine output is improving, the patient is actually responding to your treatment, and suddenly the patient gets oliguria and acute renal failure. And this anuria is because of the pressure of the tense ascites, which leads to the impediment of the renal venous outflow, which leads to renal edema and ultimately anuria. And this is a very serious condition. And therefore, tapping or paracentesis is the only option which is left with you, so that the patient does not end up in anuria because of the pressure on the kidneys. But the problem is that there is a possibility of infection. The patient may get bleeding, or patient may have problem because of the tapping also. So you have to be very careful, and you have to do tapping under USG guidance under aseptic conditions. And with all these precautions, you can go for tapping up to 4 liters of fluid can be tapped every day. There are papers which say that you can tap up to 5 liters of fluid per day to treat the patients of severe ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Then some have come up with a novel treatment called as continuous peritoneovenous shunting, where the shunt is used for the drainage of this OHSS fluid or the ascites, but you require complex setup, and this is not technically very easy, and everybody cannot do this, but this is something which is a novel treatment which is available. Now you have to take care of hemoconcentration as well, and there is a hypercoagulable state because of the OHSS, and here comes the role of prophylactic low molecular weight heparin, and this is important for the treatment of hemoconcentration. So you have to think of that part as well. So you have heparin, you have paracentesis, you have IV fluids, you have albumin. If the patient goes into hypotension, you can go for dopamine. If the patient has got renal failure, dialysis is the option. And if the patient develops ARDS, she may require ventilator support. This is a very nice chart which shows the pros and cons of all the treatment options which are available for severe OHSS. So you think of crystalloids. Crystalloids are responsible for improving the renal perfusion. They are good, but they may aggravate ascites. If you give if you ask fluid restriction, with fluid restriction the ascites is controlled, but there is a hemoconcentration. If you give albumin, it is definitely going to help you, but there is a risk of human blood product. If you give furosemide, then it will reduce the body water, but it will reduce the intravascular volume also. Indomethacin can lead to renal failure. AC inhibitors are teratogenic. Paracentesis is good in emergency situation, but there is a risk of hemorrhage, infection, and leakage. Heparin decreases the thromboembolism and the risk of thrombosis, but it increases the risk of hemorrhage. Peritoneovenous shunt is good, but it is technically not that easy and requires an elaborate setup, and there is a risk of infection. Dopamine drip helps in renal perfusion, but needs ICU care. So every treatment has got pros and cons. So you need to have a balanced approach, and you have to be highly vigilant, and you need a team work. You have to have intensivist, physician, a surgeon, along with obstetrician and IVF consultants to take care of patients with severe OHSS. The last resort in cases of severe OHSS which are not responding to treatment is to terminate the pregnancy. And I still remember some 12 years back, during initial days of my clinical IVF practice, we had one such patient where we had to abort her or terminate her, and that is really the last option. And you really feel sad for these patients, but sometimes you may have to go for this treatment if you have severe OHSS. Now, if you just look at uh, the statistics at our center, and maybe almost every one of us are experiencing this in recent days, that the incidence of PCO is definitely falling down. And last year we did almost 570 transfers, and we got 19% of patients with low AMH as a major cause of problem, and 25% patients with male factor as a factor of infertility, and only 12% patients had PCO. So the incidence of PCO is going down, and the incidence of low AMH or diminished ovarian reserve and male factor is definitely rising. This is a trend which we all are noticing in our day-to-day practice. Now you can see how the treatment of OHSS is changing. Since last 12 to 13 years of IVF practice, I have seen or witnessed the changes in the treatment modalities as far as IVF is concerned. And all these changes are definitely going to help us for going a step further towards OHSS free clinic. Like initial days from 2006 to 2010, we were using GnRH agonist. So the patients were all on long down regulation protocol. We used to give HMG up to 600 IU. We used to transfer sometimes 4 embryos, and we used to use HCG 10,000 as trigger. Then after 2010, antagonist became popular. Then we thought that 4 embryos is not a good option, so we started putting 3 embryos. We started using Ovitril for trigger, and we decided not to go beyond 450 in any case. So that is how the trends are changing. After 2016 or 17, blastocyst with single embryo transfer is something which is now possible, and we all are doing this. Freezol was done more often. Leupride or decapeptyl was given as a trigger, and as a policy, no HCG to donors is something which we started doing. And in 2020, Freezol is the actually the treatment of choice, and almost 90% of the patients, they are transferred. Embryo transfer is done later, the freezing is done, and transfer is done. That is called as cycle segmentation. In vitro maturation is something which may come in future, but I think kisspeptin is something which is the novel drug which may help us in treatment of IVF with OHSS free clinics. So that is how the trend of OHSS, you can see that the incidence is going down, and it is almost 0% in last 1 or 2 years. So I got an opportunity to contribute chapter on OHSS in this Elsevier's textbook of reproductive endocrinology, which was edited by Dr. Daftari sir, and I am thankful to Dr. Daftari for that. So we are definitely marching towards OHSS free clinic, and the truth is that OHSS must be prevented rather than treated, and the successful man profits from his mistakes and tries again in a different way. So true for OHSS. So friends, India paying tax, India wearing mask, and India having OHSS free clinic is our dream, so that we all can have chain kinin. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your excellent talk on marching towards
Thank you, Rajnish.
ovarian stimulation syndrome pre-clinics with focus on prevention and management of OHSS. Around more than 100 doctors were watching this webinar online, sir. So there are few queries from the doctors. So with your permission, I would like to put these questions to you, sir.
Yeah, sure.
So shall I put the questions, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. The first query, sir, which are the aromatics inhibitors we can give in luteal phase to prevent OHSS?
Is it possible for me to see the questions?
Which
Sir,
are
you
the
can go to the
aromatic
chat. Sir, in chat you can see. Chat box.
the queries, sir, which are the aromatics inhibitors we can give in luteal phase to prevent OHSS?
एक minute, just
The chat option is there, sir, at the
Yeah, it is
bottom.
chat option is besides this share screen. Besides share screen where you are sharing the screen, there is a chat box. Chat. The message icon is there. Chat.
At the bottom of screen, sir, at the bottom of screen.
Bottom. You stop sharing, sir. First you go to the top. You will
Yes.
see stop sharing.
Yes.
Stop sharing first, and then you can go to the bottom. You can see chat.
Yes. Now I got the questions. Yes.
Yeah, you can see from the beginning, sir, whichever questions
Right.
are there.
Okay, so I'll start answering the questions. I can see the questions on my screen. Yeah. Uh, the question from Shashikant Raghuvanshi. Does reduction of dose of FSH on day 7 reduce the chance of OHSS in ongoing stimulation if you feel cycle may end up in OHSS? I think this is a very important question, Shashikant. Actually, Gardner has said that you can start with higher dose and then reduce the dose. That is called a step down production protocol. And in step down protocol, what happens that with the reduction in the dose of HMG, the follicles which are, say, suppose 10 follicles are active, some of the follicles they undergo atresia. And because of the atresia of the follicles, you may be able to prevent the OHSS in this situation. So you can reduce the dose on day 7 and this may prevent OHSS, but the problem is that you may not get good quality oocytes at all. So that is the reason why the step down protocol is good as far as the prevention of OHSS is concerned. But if you wish to get good number and good quality of oocytes, step down protocol may not work. So in that situation, what we can do is we can definitely think of freeze-all policy, because in freeze-all policy, we are not bothered about the number of oocytes we are getting. We are not bothered about the OHSS happening in future, and we can concentrate on the quality of the oocytes. So as far as OHS is concerned, reduction of dose is good, but then it will have its effect on the quality of oocytes. There is one more question, which is from Dr. Mrunal Gaikwad, which says that, can you please explain why the endometrium is not favorable? I think this is a very interesting question. We all know that HCG is responsible for the LH surge when we give HCG as a trigger. Now this HCG has got a half-life of almost 9 days. So with this half-life of 9 days, HCG is responsible for support of corpus luteum. And with the support to corpus luteum, what happens is that the endometrium support is taken care of. If you think of giving GnRH agonist as a trigger instead of HCG, then in that situation, this GnRH agonist has got a very short half-life. And because of short half-life, the endometrium support is not good. So what that is the reason why Humaden has come up with the strategy where you can still go for embryo transfer because this part is taken care of. So if you give 1500 IU of HCG along with Lupred for stimulation, then you may get a additional support and this benefits and you get a good endometrium. But again the problem is that you give HCG, even say a low dose of HCG, the OHSS is not completely taken care of. Still you may get OHSS, and that is the reason why if you really wish to go for OHSS free clinic, the best option is to go for the freeze-all policy. But this is another option which can be tried because it is said that with low dose HCG, the chances of OHSS are dramatically low as compared to full dose of HCG. And how to take care of the endometrium is a question because HCG, though you are giving HCG, the dose of HCG is low. So it is said that in that situation, what you can do is you can add intense endometrial support in the form of very high dose of progesterone. And the best option is to give 100 milligram of progesterone intramuscularly every day. And this has to be given up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. But if you just look at the practical aspects, then I think practically it is impossible for the patient to get intramuscular 100 milligram progesterone daily for such a long period. And that is the reason we should actually go for freeze-all policy. But still this is the option which is available. Now Sachin is asking me this question, that what is your rate of OHSS in IUI and IVF? As far as IUI is concerned, we have very rarely on one or two occasions found OHSS in IUI, because in IUI we are going for a popular and practical protocol where we give gonadotropins on 3rd, 5th and 7th day or on 6th, 7th and 8th day. In that situation the chances are low. But in IVF, yes, the incidence was definitely high some 10 years back, and slowly over the last 2-3 years the OHSS incidence dramatically gone down, and it is almost nil since last 1 year. Minimum E2 levels when we can safely transfer. It is said that 3000 IU of 3000, less than 3000 is something which we want for IVF as far as E2 level is concerned, and for IUI it should be less than 1700. But what we have found is that E2 level is not the only parameter which you should consider as far as transfer is concerned. You have to take into consideration various factors. One is the E2 level. Second is the number of oocytes obtained on ovum pickup. Third is the size of the ovaries. Fourth is the clinical parameters, like whether the patient is comfortable or not, whether the patient is having dyspnea, and all these questions and all these things you can reassess on the day of embryo transfer, because you still have a chance. And on the day of ET, if you find that any of this factor is not favorable for us, say E2 levels are high on the day of HCG, you get say 20 oocytes on the day of pickup. On the day of transfer, you find that there is a fluid and the patient is dyspneic, you can actually avoid transfer even at that time. So that is the reason why we should not focus only on E2, but E2 levels above 3000 are definitely associated with high chance of OHSS as far as IVF is concerned, and above 1700 as far as IUI is concerned are associated with high OHSS. Yes, antagonist in the treatment of OHSS, definitely for the prevention of OHSS, the continuation of antagonist beyond the usual treatment cycle which we do is definitely the answer for the prevention of OHSS. And you can use this in the treatment of OHSS also, definitely, but when you have not transferred the embryos, because once you transfer the embryos, you cannot give antagonist beyond embryo transfer. how did you terminate a pregnancy? See, termination of pregnancy is the last option, as I have told you, and uh, you have to go for the termination of pregnancy by, say, evacuation or um, oral meso combination, depending on the situation. Because sometimes what happens, as I said, it's like a banduk ki goli. एक बार छूटी तो छूटी, then you have no control, absolutely no control. And sometimes what happens that unless you terminate the pregnancy, the patient did not respond at all. So in that situation, the only option which is left with you is to terminate the pregnancy, and that is a very difficult decision which you might have to take in some cases. More than 3 to 4 follicles in IUI, is there any risk of OHSS? Yes, it is said that more than 3 follicles in IUI or more than 15 or say around 20 follicles in IVF, there is always a risk of OHSS. But it all depends on the size of the follicles also. Like more than 3 follicles of 20 or 18 to 20 or more than 5 follicles of 14 to 17 is associated with high risk in IUI. So you can definitely cancel the cycle. In IUI, you should have, it is said that you should have guts to cancel the cycle. Why? Because suppose the patient is having more follicles, then you should tell the patient that since there is a possibility of OHSS, we are cancelling the cycle. And not only you have to cancel the cycle, but you have to ask the patient to take contraception in the form of barrier contraception, so that patient does not conceive. Because even if you don't do IUI, the patient might conceive. So that is the reason why you should tell the patients to use contraception and cancel the cycle, don't do IUI, and the patient is safe. The best method of termination of pregnancy. See, if the patient is in ICU, and if the patient is if the patient is not responding to the management of OHSS, you may have to go for evacuation. And though there is a risk of anesthesia, but it all depends on the situation, and in that case you may have to go for evacuation. Role of eggs in endometrial thickness. I didn't get this. Which routes should be preferred for luteal phase support with agonist trigger? Agonist trigger is something which requires a very good endometrial support, and that in that situation, what we can do is definitely we can see, as far as luteal phase support is concerned, the vaginal progesterone is said to be the best route of for luteal phase support. So natural macrolide progesterone is vaginal route is of course the best route. You cannot think of giving oral progesterone in this situation, because oral progesterone anyway they don't work much, because orally the absorption is very low. So you have to go for vaginal progesterone. But as we all know that if you just look at the best route of progesterone, the intramuscular route is the best route. Though it is not comfortable to the patient, it gives maximum progesterone delivery. So you can definitely think of giving vaginal progesterone along with the intramuscular progesterone in case of agonist trigger. Yes, abstinence can be preferred over barrier contraception, because definitely uh, if the patient is okay with abstinence, abstinence can be advised in IUI cycles. So I think we have covered almost all the questions.
Thank you, sir, for resolving all the queries of the
वो
audience.
खत्म हो रहा है वो कर रहा है
It was very informative and excellent talk regarding the prevention and management of OHSS. So with this, I'll hand over the session to Mr. Rajiv Agarwal, sir. He's our National Divisional Head for the Iowa Division of MQL. So Rajiv, sir, over to
Actually,
you.
Rajiv sir's net is not working properly, so I will just give the vote of thanks to you, sir.
Yeah, Manu.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. We thank you from the bottom of heart that you've taken your precious time today when the outbreak of COVID is there. So all the people are at home, and we have conducted this webinar. We hope that many more webinars will be conducting in future too, sir. Which gives a mileage at your place only. I thank all the doctors who have attended this webinar. I thank all the people who are directly and indirectly associated to make this webinar a successful one. And I pray to the God for for fast we come out of this COVID-19.
Yes.
And
Definitely.
blessings for everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, MQR. Thanks, Team MQR, for
Yes, sir.
giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir. Bye.
Bye.